Hello, I'm Liam Fogarty. You're watching Bay TV Liverpool. Now, 40 years ago, a young man entered the Merseyside Police Cadets. 4 decades on, he's now in charge of the service as Merseyside's Chief Constable. He is Sir Jon Murphy. Sir Jon, you're very welcome. Did you ever think 40 years ago that you would be sitting there in that splendid uniform with all these pips and all this braid as the guy at the top?
Not in a million years. I just enjoyed doing the job and came in. Never occurred to me.
How has the job changed in 40 years?
The job has changed massively. And I suppose most obviously is the volume of work. When I started on as a foot patrol officer in Toxteth. And there was time to patrol on foot then. There was time to talk to the public. And the beat I had, which was up near Myrtle Gardens, was one of the busier beats. And if my radio went 3 times a night, that was quite a busy night. The rest of the time, I had to talk to the public and make a nuisance of myself and try and make friends. Today, the officers are bounced from pillar to post, approaching 1.5 million calls a year for service. The job is done at a much quicker pace and there's much more that we have to deal with.
I mean, Merseyside has almost been a kind of pioneer in the area of community policing, man-to-man marking, I think some people called it. Is community policing viable when you are under pressure with budget reductions and so on?
Well, community policing for me is not about man-to-man marking. It's and the expression I use with all my officers, it's not what we do, it's how we do it. It's about our relationship with the public, it's about courtesy, it's about being civil, it's about giving a good service. But to give a straight answer to your question, as the cuts continue, and I lose more and more officers, and from the point I became chief in 2010, I've lost 700 police officers plus 500 support staff. I know I'm going to lose another 800 staff in the next 2 years. The future viability of neighbourhood policing, as it is currently configured, has to be in doubt.
In the summer, there was a report which said that your force was actually responding really well under these budgetary pressures. You were, meeting your targets and doing all that stuff. Why will future cuts damage the force when you've been able to cope up to now?
Well, I think we would have to be honest and say we're doing everything more effectively, more efficiently with less people. Because we've had to look really closely at everything we do, and there isn't a single part of the force that hasn't been reorganised in some way or other, but there is a law of diminishing returns. And we are seeing a rise in crime, which we haven't seen for 7 years. We have seen exponential growth in calls for service, as everybody above the age of 3, it seems these days, has a mobile phone. Quite a lot of them like to call the police. And whereas at one point in time you might get one person ring us to tell us something's happened, that's now 15 or 16 people. So the demands on us are significantly more than they used to be, and they're becoming greater. So at some point in time, we will really feel the impact of that.
You have this change programme that you and the Police and Crime Commissioner are implementing. Give us an example in day-to-day terms of how a member of the public might notice the change programme in action.
Well, I would hope the public don't notice the change programme, because what we're trying to do is configure ourselves to be as effective as we possibly can, deliver the best service we can with the resources that we've got, even though we're not happy it's a lot less than it used to be. The most obvious way the public will see it is if we get to the point where it takes us longer to respond to their calls. So far that's not happened, and they start to see less neighbourhood officers out there. So far we've been able to manage to maintain the numbers of officers in neighbourhoods. But as we lose another 400 officers over the next 2 years, as well as the 400 support staff, there will come a point in time when the police will be less visible to the public, and they will notice that. They like the comfort of seeing a bobby.
Now, are you and your fellow chief constables having to just roll with the punches as all these cuts are implemented, or is there a way of making representations? Who's making your case at the highest echelons of government?
There are a lot of conversations, as you would imagine, going on behind the scenes. I have made my views known to government, to the Home Office, and on occasions I've discussed issues with the Home Secretary. But what I don't believe is it's the role of a Chief Constable to be in the media telling the public we're all going to hell in a handcart, because I don't think that gives them a feeling of reassurance. I don't think it gives them a feeling of safety. And of course, perceptions of crime levels are as important as actual crime levels.
So you don't think your counterpart in Lincolnshire was right when he claimed his force would not be viable in 3 years if these cuts continue?
Well, what I would say is the Chief of Lincolnshire is in an entirely different place from me. All forces are started in different places. And the smaller the force, then the quicker you're going to reach the point where you cease to become viable. I think there's another factor in Lincolnshire in that when the cuts were started 4 years ago, Lincolnshire were in the throes of outsourcing much of their support staff base for things like custody, for call handling and lots of those things. The problem with that approach is if you get further cuts, you've lost control of that part of your budget. So the only place you can go in order to make your savings is to take more police officers off the streets. When you're starting, your high point of officers is a little more than 1,000 and you get 5 and 6 years into the cuts, well, it's obvious what the implications of that are. And I think at some point in time, some of the smaller forces will be subsumed into the bigger forces or amalgamate, whichever way you want to look at it.
Any big organisation who want to reduce their payroll start with the oldest, most experienced employees first. Is that the case with Merseyside Police, and is there a risk there that you will lose a kind of corporate collective knowledge that has served the county so well? That
is always a risk. What we have done is, as we have restructured and reorganised the force, people have become in scope, if you were, in terms of posts being lost, and then people apply for either voluntary redundancy, voluntary early retirement, or in some cases, sadly, compulsory redundancy. And we look at each post on its merits. So what we haven't done is a blanket approach of saying, like, you know, you're the oldest, off you go. We have been able to retain a balance of experience.
You are at the moment kind of recruiting more special constables.
Yep.
Your critics have said that that's actually a kind of sneaky way of getting people in uniform on the cheap to replace all these experienced staff who are going. What do you say to that?
No, I would reject that entirely. We've always had a vibrant special constabulary here. We've always been able to recruit into it, and they've always been an integral part of our workforce. More recently, we have taken, because after a 2-year freeze, we've been able to recruit regular officers into the force. Quite a lot of those officers have come from within the special constabulary. So we're constantly topping that number up. I mean, the specials have an absolutely vital role in keeping the public safe, but they are not and never will be a substitute for a regular police officer.
When you're facing all these budgetary challenges, what kind of creative ways have you got of maybe collaborating with other public services? Because I noticed that there was a new control centre that you're sharing with the Fire and Rescue Service. How far down that road can you go?
We've not gone as far as some other forces have in terms of collaboration, and there are all sorts of factors that drive you towards collaboration, but for everyone there's an obstacle that gets put up, makes it difficult. So, for example, differences in local authority precepts, differences in support staff working conditions, policies, difference in IT systems, all these things make what looks on the face of it straightforward actually more complicated. We're particularly pleased and proud of the Joint Command Centre, which was opened yesterday by Princess Anne, which was a really nice occasion, and it's a really good initiative. We've always had a good working relationship with Merseyside Fire and Rescue, and I think that the new command centre that we've created, which is a call centre plus joint operational control for major incidents, is a really positive step for both us and the fire service and, of course, the public.
I suppose the ultimate collaboration is a merger with another force. Now, we've heard your predecessor, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, suggest that there should be a smaller number of regional forces. We have a North West ambulance service. Why not a North West police service?
I think that the arguments for amalgamation are different depending on where you are. So if you look in this region, for example, we've got 2 metropolitan forces in us in Manchester, a couple of medium-sized forces, and we've got smaller forces. And the drive towards amalgamation are either weak or strong, depending on where you sit in that configuration. So Merseyside is in a healthy position. We've made the savings we need to save, and we will collaborate, and we're working with Cheshire, North Wales at the moment. We will collaborate where we think it's the right thing to do for us in terms of a better service to the public and being able to take money out of the organisation to meet our savings targets. I think it is inevitable, if the cuts go on the way they are, that whilst this government certainly do not support amalgamations, it is happening almost by osmosis anyway. Some forces are very close to it now, and the longer we get into cuts, the more likely it's going to happen.
You've had a look at what's happening in Scotland, where they have a new national police service. Any lessons that you can draw from that?
Well, I think the lesson to be drawn from Scotland is when you've got one government, one ministry, you haven't got the involvement of local politics in the same way. It's much easier to achieve, and of course the scale is much smaller. It seems to have worked well for Scotland, but I think the scale is hugely different, and I think the political machinations are far more complex.
Okay, so Jon, so many things to talk about, so much ground to cover. We'll talk about some of the practical things that you're doing to prevent crime and to tackle crime and to address the most serious crimes here on Merseyside. Join us after the break. Welcome back. I'm Liam Fogarty, and today I'm talking to the Chief Constable of Merseyside, Sir Jon Murphy. So Jon, let's dig a little deeper into some of the reports into your force we've seen recently. You're getting a lot of kudos and credit for surviving the wave of austerity and so on. But are you concerned that the area of crime prevention is one of those that's going to take a hit when you're concentrating on keeping your men and women deployed in the field at a time when your budget is shrinking?
It's an interesting question, because it depends what you mean by crime prevention, because traditionally people think better locks, things to stop people breaking into cars and what have you. Well, actually, crime prevention is about a whole range of things. It's about effective use of intelligence. It's about having officers in the right place at the right time for the right reasons. And it's about problem-solving policing, and it's about neighbourhood policing. It's about, instead of just responding to an incident of antisocial behaviour or low-level crime, dealing with it and walking away, it's about what caused this crime in the first place and what can we do to stop it. And sometimes that might be as simple as some lighting, sometimes it might be a more complex thing. I think crime prevention has become much more mainstreamed and much more a part of day-to-day policing than it used to be. It's no longer that bolt-on.
Do you think people in our part of the world are unreasonably afraid of crime, given that for some time now our crime figures have been falling?
I think all of the statistics and the research that's been done on this shows that nationally, people's perception of what is happening out there does not match the reality. I think that's particularly pertinent on Merseyside. Merseyside is a safe place to live, to work, and to go out and enjoy yourself. Crime statistics would show you that. The views of the public when they're surveyed, and think about the question they're asked that. But generally speaking, because of the stereotypes about Liverpool that we all suffer from, not least because of an inability to attract, on occasions, investment into the city and create jobs, because of those old stereotypes, that perception that crime is worse than it is tends to pervade.
Does our local media help or hinder?
That's a really good question, and I'm probably going to duck that one.
We haven't had time to build up a track record
I
yet
think,
at TV.
But the media have a job to tell the news. The public need to be informed. I think there's an issue about how the news is told. I think, by and large, we get a fair service off the local media.
3 or 4 years ago, the city of Liverpool in particular, but Merseyside as a whole, was making all the wrong headlines because of gang-related crime. A whole series of really, distressing incidents involving firearms. My perception is things have gone a little quiet on that front. Where do we stand in terms of gun crime and those kind of organised acts of violence?
Well, the first thing to say is I'm glad that's your perception, and hopefully that's the perception of the broader public as well. Gun crime has gone down considerably. Shooting incidents have gone down. Both the vast majority of incidents involving the use of a firearm are actually criminal damage committed with a gun. On very small number of occasions, somebody is hit with a weapon, and rarely somebody is actually tragically killed. That hasn't happened actually for almost 18 months now, and I want to touch wood when I say that. We have put a huge amount of effort into tackling this particular problem. We have a strategy called Relentless. That reflects the fact that we recognise you can't pick this up and put it down, and when the problem's gone away, you stop it and you deal with something else. We have dedicated teams who spend a lot of time investigating firearms incidents, but we also do an awful lot in terms of working with our partners, particularly in education, particularly in schools, in trying to divert young people away from what starts life as a little bit of an urban street gang, and if it's not checked, develops into membership of an organised crime group. You can't solve anything with enforcement. There has to be a holistic package.
But there are areas of Liverpool, even now, where of an evening, once darkness falls, young men, lads, gather around in clusters and, cause a nuisance and create a sense of kind of fear and foreboding. And yet you'll wait a while before you see a police officer intervene. Where do we stand in terms of breaking up that kind of antisocial behaviour?
Well, I think it's the point that I've just made. I mean, we grade our calls in response to with the limited resource we've got. We respond as quickly as we can, and hopefully we put the right priority to the right calls. And as you've identified yourself, gun crime is absolutely a priority. But it comes back to the point I've just made. We have to stop people getting involved in crime in the first place. That's why I've got almost 40 officers whose full-time job is to work in schools, is to work with children from problematic families, perhaps with siblings who are older siblings who are involved in gun crime, and even working with primary schools as well. I've never ceased to be amazed when I go into primary schools, not infrequently, and I talk to young kids as young as 4, 5 and 6, and they ask the chief constable a question and they ask me a question about a gun. And it never ceases to shock me, actually. So you can never start too late. By the time they get to secondary school, it's too late. So working with the council, with social services, with other partners towards preventing the problem in the first place is absolutely critical.
The most recent batch of crime figures were encouraging, as you say, but there was one kind of blip, and that was quite a sharp increase in the number of incidents of violence against the person. What was behind that?
What has actually arisen, and it's risen sharply, is what is referred to as as assault without injury. When you and I went to school, if a couple of boys had a fight in the playground, that would be dealt with by the school. It would never come out of the school.
There'd be boxing gloves in the gym in my school.
Indeed. If it was two girls pulling each other's hair, that would never be reported to the police. A whole host of physical interactions between people. Sometimes it's a punch where there's no real injury, but a whole host of those physical interactions between people are reported to the police in the way they never were.
And in terms of your efforts to kind of bring the public with you, the British way has always been policing by consent, taking people with you. When you look at, say, somewhere like the United States and you see how their police are kind of militarised, we still see quite shocking scenes to do with anti-terrorism, for instance, where police officers are armed to the hilt and they're wearing the Kevlar suits and all of that. Have British police forces kind of succumbed to that temptation to go all American and to go all kind of gung-ho, do you think?
I'll speak for my police force, and Merseyside Police absolutely hasn't. There are occasions when my officers have to wear that kind of equipment, and we ask them to do some very difficult things on behalf of the public to keep them safe. But the vast majority of my officers go out every day going back to the Peelian principles, the police are the public and the public are the police. That is a message that is as good today as it was back in the 1830s when it was coined, and it's something we say to our staff all the time. And I mentioned a little earlier, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. We have a campaign in the force, it's called Just Talk, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. I want my officers to go out and just talk to people. I don't care what they talk about, provided it's an appropriate conversation. What's the weather like? How are the kids? If we don't talk to the public won't talk to us. If a police officer walks down the street, even in a high visibility coat, the chances are a member of the public won't even notice. But if the officer says, good morning, then they will. And that's what they're encouraged to do.
You've got more than 7,000 men and women on your books, both in uniform and out of uniform and in support roles and so on. But there has been a spate in the last 12, 18 months of stories in the local press about officers who'd fallen short of the highest standards. And inevitably, they're highly publicised, we get to hear about them. What is the state of those processes inside your force for identifying bad apples and getting them out of the force?
Right, I'll make a couple of comments here. Any organisation of 7,000 people is always going to have some bad apples. What we have made clear, the leadership of the force have made clear to the staff is, this is an organisation that will not sweep things under the carpet. We will not tolerate bad behaviour, we will not tolerate bad performance. And if that means we've got to wash our dirty linen in public, which we never like doing, it hurts because it damages our reputation and the confidence the public have in us. But if we have to wash our dirty linen in public, we will. We are not frightened of charging police officers with criminal offences if it's appropriate. Sadly, we don't. So fortunately, we don't have to do that very often. And we're not frightened of disciplining people, and we're not frightened of sacking them. There's been a recent HMIC inspection report into the force in terms of integrity, our processes for dealing with discipline issues. And one of the things that really pleased me is per 100 officers nationally, complaints against Merseyside Police are 30% lower than the national average. Now, if you look at the nature of some of the challenging things we have to deal with, some of our more deprived communities, I think that's a massive testimony to the ability of our officers to talk to people, remain calm and do the right thing.
This February you will celebrate, if that's the right word, 5 years in this job as Chief Constable of Merseyside. What surprised you about the job, very briefly?
I'm not sure there's very much surprised me about the job. Oh, actually, that's not true. I knew when I took the job over it was going to be a big ask because we knew that cuts were coming. And at the time, we had the Merseyside Police Authority and we discussed how we deal with this. And somebody once said they're going to take 6% out of the organisation. And there was shock and horror in the committee room. No, that will never happen. So far, we've taken out, in real terms, something like 23% of our budget. And in the next 2 years, we're going to lose another £33 million. That's been a surprise.
That is a big job that's getting bigger all the time.
Indeed.
So Jon Murphy, thanks very much for joining us. That's all from me. See you sometime soon. Goodbye.